Well, it's very pleasing to see the Pfizer vaccine get that regulatory approval here in Australia. We've said all along that we wouldn't rush the process, that we wouldn't cut corners, that we would make community safety and community health our first concern and our first priority. And by having the vaccine approved and with its delivery expected by mid to late February, we can start to see the rollout across the country. And that will be good news, not just for the economy, but obviously for the health of our citizens.
And that's been a big thing for Australia as well. When you look at comparatively the health outcomes here in Australia and the economic outcomes, we're basically very much ahead of the curve when it does come to a lot of the rest of the developed nations. So in terms of perhaps what we were thinking 6 months ago to now, you've got to be incredibly pleased with where we are sitting right now.
Both in terms of the health response and the economic response, Australia is better placed than nearly any other nation in the world right now. There's no room for complacency, and as you and I know, the virus is very stubborn, and it will continue to look for opportunities to rise up, and we need to be very vigilant in our contact testing and tracing methods. In terms of our health position right now, we're only seeing a handful of cases, and those cases are coming from people visiting Australia or Australians coming home. We've been very successful in helping to suppress community transmission, so much so that restrictions have eased and the economy has opened up. As a result, we saw most recently our unemployment numbers fall to 6.6%. And when you consider, Will, that at the height of the crisis, Treasury were saying to me that without the major economic support programs that we were putting in place, unemployment could potentially have risen to 15%. This is a very good position for us to be in. We've also seen some positive data around consumer and business confidence coming back to pre-COVID levels around home loans and the construction sector and around the retail sector. And in the September quarter, we saw the biggest growth number for GDP of 3.3% since 1976, the biggest quarterly jump in GDP since 1976. So across the board, the economic data is trending in the right direction, but there is still a long way to go, and certainly parts of the economy are still doing it tough.
So in terms of that economic recovery, obviously your approach has been initially in order to stimulate, to really ensure that during the pandemic that no one was really left behind when it did come to getting those wage subsidies and support for businesses at the same time. But now we're shifting towards rather than necessarily having those subsidies continue past March, more of an incentivization for business to start creating jobs, start creating growth and really driving that business-led recovery, as opposed to it just being strictly handouts like we are perhaps seeing in other parts of the world. Is that what's most important to you? Really stimulating and incentivizing business to drive that economic growth?
Well, the economy is certainly transitioning, and so has our economic response. I mean, initially when the crisis hit hardest and the economy effectively went into lockdown, our first concern was to avoid people getting sacked and going onto the unemployment queue. So what we did is we put in place an economy-wide wage subsidy called the JobKeeper program, which at its peak was supporting 3.6 million Australian workers and around 1 million Australian businesses. And it was a $1,500 a fortnight flat subsidy. And that helped maintain that formal connection between employers and employees and help avoid seeing the unemployment rate rising higher. We also put in place other benefits or supports for small business with a cash flow boost of around $35 billion, which was to assist with working capital. We also effectively doubled the safety net with what was called a coronavirus supplement, job seeker supplement. And we put in place other programs subsequently to incentivize and support business investment with instant asset write-offs, which would allow businesses to purchase new equipment or machinery and write it all off in year one, as well as tax cuts that we brought forward and infrastructure spending that we brought forward, all helping to generate economic activity and to boost household income. So we have seen a very comprehensive response from the government, and we've worked in partnership with our central bank, who has eased monetary policy through this process. I think that partnership has worked very well, and our commercial banks have also come to the table by providing loan relief for millions of Australians, so that they don't have to meet their interest and principal repayments. All of that has meant that the economy was successfully put into hibernation. The virus was got under control. The restrictions then eased, and now the jobs are very much coming back. And a very telling statistic, Will, is that of the 1.3 million Australians who either lost their jobs or saw their working hours reduced to zero at the height of the pandemic, 90% of those are now back at work. So still some way to go, but we are seeing very positive signs across the Australian economy.
And Shuja, like I was saying, the Australian economic recovery is strong, but there are always going to be external risk factors when it does come to our recovery. We've recently seen a new president installed in the United States, and perhaps a change of approach when it does come to the previous administration. So what are you expecting, or are you foreseeing any kind of differential between the outcomes for Australia with this new presidency, particularly in our region?
Well, we welcome the incoming Biden administration, and we look forward to working with them. The strength of the Australia-US alliance and the history of the relationship is that it hasn't depended on who sits in the lodge or who sits in the White House. The relationship has been strong and enduring, based on mutual respect, based on shared values, and certainly shared interests.